Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you know how to share me, share me. If you know how to tweet me out, tweet me out. If you know how to share me to Facebook, go ahead and share me to Facebook on your page. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to Periscope. Good morning, Lady Stephanie. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning to those of you who are watching me by YouTube live stream. Good morning to those of you who are watching me outside of these apps, but you're still watching me through your laptop. I want to say good morning to you. And I believe I am shared on my Facebook page already, which is a nice feature that Periscope has added. And as you can see, I am all Team Sparkle. Every day I try to wear something around this time to add a little sparkle to my day. I believe in the sparkle. I believe in the power of the sparkle to brighten up any situation. Spread a little holiday cheer. Yep. I do celebrate Christ at this time. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles, and today is Teachable Tuesday. We're back in our book, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, and we were reading Dick Gregory's book, Moments in Black History. His last book that he wrote before he passed away, which was pretty much like a summation of several things that he wanted to leave with Black America and remind Black America of, and maybe some things that people didn't know as far as Black history was concerned. And we finished that book, believe it or not, we finished it before we went on break. So I decided to go into my archives to find another great read, and this is a selection of readings. It's actually called, and you can actually order it online, but this is a really old copy. This is called Great Documents in Black American History. A lot of these are writings from all different parts of Black history. Excuse me. From basically when we first kind of came out of slavery as our ancestors did, some of our ancestors did, right? All the way kind of up into the legacy of Malcolm X. So these are actually writings that people were writing during the time periods and time frames to really let you see how people were thinking. And I think it's important for us to go back and read some of these, because a lot of times, especially right now, I see a lot of revisionist history. What does that mean? It means I see a lot of people saying things about what the time period was like that aren't not true. Or I see a lot of people talking about us as Black Americans, African Americans, whichever term you use, but when you go back to what they were saying, you can tell that people have not done their homework, right? For example, there's a piece in here on Marcus Garvey where Marcus Garvey is talking about his philosophy and opinions on his philosophy. We're gonna read it because we need to understand, what did Marcus Garvey actually say? For all the people who call themselves Garveyites and followers of Garvey, we can actually go back to what he was saying about his philosophy and his movement and see whether or not these people actually compare or meet the standards of what he was talking about, right? Because there are a lot of people right now who are throwing around phrases. They're throwing around the names of these leaders of the past. But then when you go back and you read the works of these leaders of the past, they are not matching up to what that leader actually stood for. For example, all right, I know that some faith leaders, right, just relaunched the Poor People's Campaign. Well, back in 2015, I believe, and into 2016, I began to read the works and the writings of Martin Luther King himself and what he was saying and what he stood for. All right. And one of the people who was leading that major campaign happens to be someone who is almost like I would say, a cheerleader for abortion. All right. Especially abortion in the black community. He's a faith leader, but he's also very, 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 very pro-abortion. All right. So if you're saying you're leading a campaign about morality, okay, but you are excluding the fact that taking the life of a child in the womb is murder, I am a little confused as to how you're leading a moral campaign, but you don't see that as immoral. All right. And then on top of that, you are saying that you are going to continue the campaign and the goals of Martin Luther King through the Poor People's Campaign. All right. Which is about economic justice. But at the same time, if you understood what Martin Luther King stood for, all right, Martin Luther King did not want the LGBTQ agenda tacked on to his agenda. That's number one. And number two, Martin Luther King was not for abortion. All right. So those two things concern me when people are saying that they're doing something in the tradition of King. All right. So again, I want to purposefully go back and read some of these writings from the early part of the 1900s on, okay, talking about us as Black Americans. I think this is actually a pretty awesome book because it talks about the narrative of, it gives you a little bit of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in here. It gives you Booker T. Washington's views on what he's trying to do with black people at the time. It gives you what we're going to, some of the things we're going to be reading, the new Negro. What did that term actually mean? Because now people are using it again and saying that they're new Negroes or they're the new black or the different kind of black person. What does that mean? Langston Hughes talks about the black artists and the racial mountains they have to climb. The one we're going to dig into today is by E. Franklin Frazier, and he's talking about the black bourgeoisie. And again, this is a term that is now coming back up again. And I think we need to go back to when people were first writing about the black bourgeoisie and what they actually were. Who were they considered in society? Okay, because it wasn't everybody. So, that being said, I hope that by now you have something to drink. I do. Exactly. Origins. Origins are important. So, if you're with me for the first time, I want to say good morning to you. And I want to say Teachable Tuesdays on my broadcast are dedicated to teaching about Black America, race, racism, all of those different topics. That's what we cover on Teachable Tuesdays. If you want to hear about relationships, marriage, dating, good morning to beloved, courting, etc., that's what we're going to talk about on tomorrow, right? Wisdom Wednesdays where we want to win in our life, we want to win in our relationships. That's what we'll be covering on Wednesday. You want to hear about theology. You want to hear about discussion about the occult. You want to hear about worldviews. You want to hear about the body of Christ, early believers, what we were doing, church history, etc. We handle that on Thursdays. And then Fridays, we end the week with health and wealth. So I will always give you something concerning business, concerning how to improve your business, business tips, what other business leaders are doing in their field, what's new in technology, and also health. All right. So if you're with me for the first time, that's how we roll. So let's begin. Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. As you all know, we are on chapter 7, but throughout this book, we've been talking about the Crusades and what happened after the Crusades. We've been talking about how Africa was already a empire. It was already several empires. We've been talking about how Africa was not this quote unquote dark continent that had primitive quote unquote unlearned people, right? We also learned that the term primitive does not mean unlearned, but it actually means the first in something. So we've talked about that. We've talked about the slave trade, how and why it started. We talked about how these other nations, basically because of what they were going through in Europe, okay, they were coming out of their dark ages. They were coming out of famine. They were coming out of the Black Plague. They had already been warring with each other and all of that stuff. So there had to be they had to go out of their own land pretty much at that point to figure out how they were going to build back up their own country and their own economy. And we know that they did that through the slave trade. To this day, most countries' economy in some way, shape, or form, right, has some kind of connection to the slave trade. So why is that important? Well, look at what is happening even today. And I try to tell someone that slave trading never really stopped. All right. When people say slavery is over, yes, slavery is over in terms of chattel slavery within the United States. But slavery and slave trade never stopped. And some people are shocked at what they see happening in Libya. But it's not just happening in Libya on the continent of Africa. It's still happening in other places there. You just don't see it on the news. All right. A while back, I forget what country it was, where they were selling and trading people during wartime, and some of those boys escaped. I forget what country it was, but they wound up escaping, and then they wound up here in the United States, and then they were given, you know, opportunity for life and pursuit of happiness and all of that. But the point is, it has not ever stopped. Okay, maybe we've stopped paying attention, right? But it has not ever stopped in fullness. And then here's the other piece that I find very ironic, because people are always talking about Christianity and Christianity being the slave master's religion, which totally negates the fact that Christianity was in Africa thousands of years before the slave trade. But they just totally bypass that, and they just keep calling Christianity the slave master's religion. See how that's very convenient. But these same people who call Christianity the slave master's religion, who now practice Islam, are totally bypassing the fact that it was Islamic people who traded Africans and participated in the original slave trade to get us to the Americas. So we're going to ignore their part in that, but we're going to blame it all on the white slave owners. No ma'am and no sir. Everybody played a part in the slave trade. Now, what I think is still ironic is that you still have people who practice the Islamic faith, who, when you look on television and you just saw Libya, it's Arabic Islamic people selling those Africans. I know it's quiet. It's Islamic people that are selling those Africans. It's Islamic people that are selling those Africans and cutting them open while they're alive and pulling out their organs for sale. It's quiet. I know. It's Islamic people right now that are selling Africans for $400 a piece. Okay, it's Islamic people right now that are burning these people alive after they gut them and pull out the organs that they want to for sale. So don't come talking to me about what Christians have done through slavery and you stop there and don't give a complete picture. Because everybody needs to be held into account. That's the point I'm making. So you can't make this, exactly, you can't make this about, oh, this is the slave religion. All right? When you go back, if you do your homework and you go back, church history, the early church fathers were African. So what are you talking about? They were African. They were African. Before the Greeks got involved, the early church fathers were African. Okay. So, all right, if that's what you've been saying all this time, I'm going to need you to go back and do some study and do some research, okay? Because though there was a bastardized form of Christianity, okay, that was delivered to some of the slaves, if you start digging deeper and deeper, you will find out that some of those slaves knew Yah. Because people like to say that most of them came over and their religion was Islam when the slaves came over. If that is true, then you have to ask yourself, what was their religion before Islam? Because history tells me that Islam came in and converted Christians by force. So if they came over to the Americas and they were practicing Islam when they came, you have to ask yourself, what were they practicing before Islam? That's a little homework for you, okay? All right. Chapter 7. Sorrow in a New Land. Let us begin reading. When in 1492 Columbus, representing the Spanish monarchy, discovered the New World, he set in train the long and bitter international rivalry over colonial possessions, for which after 4.5 centuries, no solution has yet been found. Portugal, which had initiated the movement of international expansion, claimed the new territories on the ground that they fell within the scope of the Papal Bull of 1455. The Papal Bull is the Pope's edict, okay, of 1455, authorizing her to reduce to servitude all infidel peoples. So a decree went out, 1455. The Catholic Church at the time said and authorized human beings to be reduced to servitude, anybody who was not of the Catholic faith. So when we talk about what do people need to repent for, what they need to, what do they need to be concerned about, how are they tied into a trade that produced such horrific results upon the world? Hello. You authorize people to reduce other human beings to servitude because you called them infidels. In other words, they were not members of your faith. So they became an infidel. Therefore, it became all right to reduce them to servitude. That's what that means. Okay. Two powers, to avoid controversy, sought arbitration, and as Catholics turned to the Pope, a natural and logical step in an age when the universal claims of the papacy were still unchallenged by individuals and governments. So at this particular time, the Catholic Church claimed universal rulership over everybody, and it went unchallenged. After carefully sifting the rival claims, the Pope issued a 1493 a series of papal bulls which established a line of demarcation between the colonial possession of the two states. The East went to Portugal and the West went to Spain. The partition, however, failed to satisfy Portuguese aspirations, and in the subsequent year, the contending parties reached a more satisfactory compromise in the Treaty of Tordesillas, which rectified the papal judgment to permit Portuguese ownership of Brazil. All right? So, when you see countries still fighting for control of Africa, Africa's leaders, and therefore Africa's resources, okay, it started here. And this is a practice that just continues to switch countries' hands. All right? So now, who do we have that is pretty much recolonizing Africa now? China. China is recolonizing parts of Africa, just in case you didn't know. All right? Everybody continues to talk about Africa as this forlorn place, as this, you know, they, of course, they're still showing you the feed the children pictures, but they're not telling you that the children can't be fed when you keep raping the land. The children can't be fed if you keep taking the resources out of the land and sending them to other countries, right? Because that's what's happening. People are still getting rich and wealthy off of the resources of Africa. And God forbid, should you land on a piece of Africa, if you're an African, God forbid, you should be living on a piece of land there where there is gold, or where there is oil, or where there is diamonds, or whether there is the new elements that they're using to put in our cell phones over here in America. God forbid your land should contain any of those resources, because the powers that be are going to find a reason of why that land no longer belongs to you. And if you don't hand over your land, you're going to wind up buried in it. I'm not talking about what I heard. I'm talking about what I know from people I know that live in the country and are on the ground. And this is happening. And again, it's not being reported. The above quote from Eric Williams' neoclassic work, Capitalism and Slavery, first published in 1944, places in focus an international situation that started in the latter part of the 15th century that is still alive and with us on the eve of the 21st century. Michael Bradley's book, The Columbus Conspiracy, is a well-researched inquiry into this event that changed the world for all times to come. This event set in motion what Zuckerberg did in Hawaii. Yes, he stole 700 acres from the indigenous people. Yes, he did. Research it. This event set in motion the Atlantic slave trade that made possible the economic rise of Europe and the expansion of the influence and domination of European people throughout most of the world. Christopher Columbus is the best known of a number of Western thugs and murderers who has been presented to the world as a hero and a discoverer. A future examination of his action will prove that he had no regard for the people he encountered on the islands of the Caribbean, and he did not appreciate their initial friendship toward him and his crew. A fact that is often overlooked is that a large number of the crew of the 3 vessels of Christopher Columbus were criminals. They were let out of jail to go on this voyage because it was difficult to recruit other people because of the obvious and apparent danger of such a mission. So when someone says, I'm afraid of people coming from other countries, okay, because they're not sending us their best and their brightest, it's very ironic that someone would say that, because the original people who came here to the Americas were not the best and the brightest. They were prisoners. They were indebted, and they were coming to do their indentured servitude, which was a form of debt repayment. So they weren't the best and the brightest that came over here initially. All right, I'm moving on because I know somebody's upset. I already know. Your favorite hero was not the best and the brightest. The following extracts taken from the journal of the first voyage of Christopher Columbus clearly indicate his attitude towards the indigenous people of the Caribbean islands and the Africans he had previously met. The Portuguese generally referred to the west coast of Africa as Guinea. It also indicates that Christopher Columbus could have been a participant in the early Portuguese slave trade. Well, of course he was, because he was learning from the Portuguese who to trade, where to trade, how to take them, and he was also learning the sea. Once he got the navigation piece down, he was ready to ask for money from the royal family at the time so he could get going on this voyage. This is from Christopher Columbus's journey and journal. All right. It says, the enslavement of the Aboriginal Indians, Friday, 12th of October. They should be good servants and intelligent, for I observed that they quickly took in what was said to them. Sunday, 14th of October. These people are very simple as regards the use of arms or weapons. As your highnesses will see from the 7 that I caused to be taken, to bring home and learn our language and return, unless your highnesses should order them all to be brought to Castile, or to be kept as captives on the same island, for with 50 men they can all be subjugated and made to do what is required of them. Monday, the 12th of November. Yesterday a canoe came alongside the ship with 6 youths in it. 5 came on board, and I ordered them to be detained. They are now here. I afterwards sent a house on the western side of the river and seized 7 women, old and young, and 3 children. I did this because the men would behave better in Spain if they had women of their own land than without them. Which goes into one of the things that a lot of people do not talk about. And that is, all of us did not come from Africa. Let me sip my orange juice here. Now, thank God I know my family's history, so I know all of my family did not come from Africa. Some of my family have been here. Somebody hashtag, we been here. And some of your ancestors, though they tell you all black people came from Africa, that's not true. Some of your ancestors were the natives. I know, shocking, right? Some of your ancestors were the natives. And Christopher Columbus is giving us a key right here as to what they did. All right? So many people think that the slave trade just happened from Africa to North America and South America, right? In the Caribbean. They think that it was just Africans that were brought over to the Americas. But no, 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 no. Oh my. It was not just that. It was people like Christopher Columbus coming to the Americas, as he just told you, stealing natives from the Americas and shipping them to Spain and Africa to learn the language of Spain and Africa to be shipped back. I know somebody don't like that. A plus B equals C. In other words, some of us been here and some of us been here twice. They're not going to teach you that. I guarantee you they're not going to teach you that in public school. The real Black history. That your ancestors were here, were shipped to learn the people, and then were shipped back. Y'all want me to read it again? I'm going to read it again in case you didn't hear it. I'm going to read it one more time. Listen to what he says. He said, these people seem very simple in regards to the use of arms or weapons. As your highnesses will see from the 7 that I caused to be taken to bring home and learn our language and return. Hello? Hello? He's telling you what they did. So when some of your ancestors tell you, we been here, we not from Africa, can you work on believing them? See, my great-grandmother's home is registered as a historic landmark that she been here. So you can't tell me my ancestors came from Africa, because I got proof they've been here. But I know everybody doesn't have that proof. But what I'm telling you is, not all of y'all are from Africa. And I know what I'm about to say is going to mess some other people up. I already know. But all these DNA tests that y'all are taking, please go do some research on the DNA tests. Because most of it is fraudulent. Most of it is fraudulent. And some of the DNA tests, if you read the fine print, they take control over your DNA. And they restrict your family from utilizing your DNA. So you guys need to read the fine print before you start handing over your genetic material to people you don't know, to people you ain't never seen. You don't know what they're doing with your DNA sample because you're so excited about finding out your ancestry. Just do some research. Go to Google and type in DNA tests are not accurate and see all the articles that come up where they give you the detail as to why those tests are not accurate. But another gentleman brought up a really good point that I had not thought about, because we know now that they know enough science now that they can actually cause some diseases. It was on the Today Show the other day. Awesome. They know enough about genetics, right, to be able to create certain diseases that will attach to certain people groups and will not attach to others. This is not fake news. Please do some research. Some of you all don't understand why the Black community gets so addicted to cigarettes. They did a study. There's a certain genetic strand that causes us to be more addicted to nicotine. Do you think that was accidental? I'm just asking. Okay. I know I'm going, whew, I know it's going over some of y'all heads. But listen, the gentleman made a very good point. He said, why, if you know this country is known for creating things that attach to certain people's genetic material and others, it doesn't bother. If they create tests, for example, if they're creating the HPV vaccinations that only cure the strands in white women and not in anybody else, that's also true. You can go look that up. If they can do that, if they can create a solution that only hits the kinds of HPV that white women get, and they get cured, but nobody else is getting cured, but they want everybody to take this vaccination. What makes you think that they're not doing something with your genetic material. In other words, if you already know that you are in a country and a government that does not mean you any good most of the time, why in the world would you give them free access to your genetic material? In other words, don't make it easier for them to create something that aligns with your DNA. Make sense? Okay. Now, I know once this broadcast is over, you are going to be the smart citizen that I know you are, and you're going to start doing your research on these genetic tests, all of them. Ancestry.com. There's another one out called 23andMe. There's a whole bunch of new companies that have come out since they saw that Ancestry.com was so successful. Right. I'm not going to pay you to take my genetic information to then be able to use my genetic information to create something to kill me. Y'all go ahead. But, I mean, I'm just saying. But I'm not just saying. All right? So listen, I'm going to stop there because I think that was enough to get y'all started from this Columbus book. But we're going to continue. He's talking about the forced migration. We'll be back in this book next Tuesday. But Columbus just told you what they did. He just told you out of his own journals what they were doing. They were snatching up natives, taking them to other countries, teaching them the language, and then bringing them back. All right. We're moving on to the black bourgeoisie. If you enjoyed today's history lesson, put some hearts on the screen. Black bourgeoisie. Oh, I already had it marked. Good. The Black Bourgeoisie by E. Franklin Frazier. Black Bourgeoisie, the concluding chapter, which is reprinted here, was first written in French and published in Paris in 1955. It was published the same year that Rosa Parks' defiance of Southern custom precipitated a 55-week bus boycott by the Negroes in Montgomery, Alabama, and inspired seemingly a new age of protest. The English version of the book, which was published in the United States 2 years later in 1957, was to have a similar effect among Negro intellectuals and Negro youth, many whom had become dissatisfied with the polite leadership of the previous generation. Although a sociological study, Frazier's book was a polemic against the Negro middle class. So who are the black bourgeoisie? They are supposed to be, or they were originally, the Negro middle class. But as we know, with our current economy, the Negro middle class is almost zero. Okay? Because the goal right now is to eliminate the middle class altogether, and you're going to have really, really, really poor people and really, really, really wealthy people. It's called class warfare. That is what is going on right now. All right, so Frazier characterizes the Negro middle class as a strange mixture of the peasant and the gentleman, and whose ancestry was the mixed blood aristocracy that was free before the Civil War. I need y'all to hear this. I need y'all to hear this. Because everybody who thinks that they're bourgeoisie are not bourgeoisie. Yeah, let's go back. Let's hear what he says, and then I'm going to break it down a little bit for you, okay? Because even though you might make it to the middle class by your income, that does not make you bourgeoisie, the black bourgeoisie, okay? Let's go again, one more time. It is a strange mixture of the peasant and the gentleman, whose ancestry the people you came from, was mixed blood aristocracy, or what we might term today, mixed race aristocracy. These were people who were free before the Civil War. 200 years of enforced labor, he had written in his first article on the subject, with no incentive in its just reward, more than any inherent traits, explain why the Negro has for so long been concerned with consumption rather than production. And we talked about that before. When people say, why are Black Americans the #1 consumers in the country? Why are we the #1 consumers in the country? And for those who don't understand that we're the #1 consumers in the country, business-wise, they find out shortly after they offend us. Yeah, so if you don't think that we matter to the economy, yes. If you don't think that blacks matter to the economy and you're in business and you're racist and you decide to insult black people who are the #1 consumers in the country, you will find out very quickly who is actually the consumers. The people that are actually going out and buying most of the stuff are the very people that you're insulting. And your business will suffer. It will. Even if you don't like us. I know it's quiet. It's quiet. I know. But he's saying, because we had 200 years of enforced labor and no ability to really buy, when our ancestors and relatives came out of that, it was almost like a level of freedom to show that you can buy things, to show that you can consume things. And that mentality and that generational habit has continued until today. All right. There was even, you can look it up. There was a commercial back in the day that was explaining how to sell to the Negro. The commercial is literally called How to Sell to the Negro. And it talked about these traits about black people, and because they were experiencing this newfound freedom, why it was so beneficial to start selling to us. Okay. But he tells you who the black bourgeoisie are. The black bourgeoisie were those who had what they call mixed blood ancestry. That means probably one of the parents were white, and therefore they were considered free before the Civil War. Though that's considered black bourgeoisie. You have to have a certain ancestry to be considered black bourgeoisie. All right. For example, President Obama would be considered black bourgeoisie. I'll wait. Peasant virtues are middle-class faults, and so are the gentlemen's, and the Negro has come by these in curious but inevitable ways, he writes. It was precisely this peasant gentleman who was shocked by the book and who felt that Fraser, himself a Negro, had betrayed the Negro community. Fraser's concern for the Negro middle class, the Negro he felt lacked a true upper class, grew out of his interest in the traditions of the Negro family. It was this interest that had led to his major work, The Negro Family in the United States, a kind of natural history of the Negro family and how it evolved through slavery and emancipation. Throughout his work, Fraser assumed that the family structure grew as a peculiar response to the environment in which it flourished. He was convinced that the Negro family, which had become oriented largely to the values of American culture, had assured the survival of the Negro in American society. The development by Negroes of an institutional family in the space of about 175 years, Fraser said, telescope the age-long evolution of the human family. The last conclusion is especially interesting as it reinforces the view that African tradition had disappeared among American Negroes. All right. So he was basically saying that, oh yeah, the black family, they're going to continue to move about in this space because a lot of the African traditions that were brought over, remember, all of us didn't come from Africa though. The traditions that were within have now disappeared amongst the American Negroes because they're now assimilating into the quote unquote American style family of American culture. The matriarchal organization, for example, where it exists, is both a response to the conditions of the American environment and a repetition of one of the archetypal ways of organizing a human family. It is not, Fraser felt, a perpetuation of or a reversion to a matriarchal tradition in the African heritage. Similarly, polygamous patterns among Negro males where they exist are not a carryover from an ancient heritage. Yeah, so black men having several different women, he says, are not a carryover from an ancient heritage, but they reflect rather the lack of a deeply rooted family tradition, a lack that was traceable to the ugly facts of slavery. So when people say, and remember, he's writing this in the 1920s. So when people say that there are certain habits and behaviors of black men that are indigenous to us, he's telling you these are not carryovers from their ancient heritage. These are carryovers from the practices that happened during slavery. When you're not allowed to have a family, quote unquote traditional, when you are not allowed in most cases to legally marry, so you're jumping brooms, when you are not allowed to be with one woman because we have to use you as a stud to breed with not just the woman you like, but sometimes to breed with your aunt, to breed with your sister, because we are treating you as beasts of burden. And so we need you to produce more beasts of burden for this system of chattel slavery. How are you supposed to get attached to somebody in a family structure when this is happening for hundreds of years? So he's saying that these polygamous patterns for the Negro were a carryover from slavery. Fraser was convinced, that is, that the African cultural heritage perished because no social organization was formed to perpetuate it. And we know that no social organization during that time was formed to perpetuate it, because in order to give you and allow you a social organization of a family, I would first have to see you as human. The only social institution that existed for the Negro during slavery was the plantation system. And the only cultural heritage that this provided was European and not African. Black bourgeoisie supports Fraser's general view that the African cultural heritage has been completely sawed off or cut off, a view that continues to generate much controversy. The predicament of the bourgeoisie, he says, was that they were running away from both the folk culture of the Negro masses and the remnants of the genteel tradition. They were thus living in a vacuum, devoting their lives to conspicuous consumption, a world of make-believe, aided in this by their rejection of the white world. Fraser's book was welcomed by a new generation of blacks who did not aspire to become the hollow men and women that Fraser portrayed, and who, in keeping with the swelling of nationalist tide, celebrated the cultural values of the Negro masses. So, that's just the introduction, Lord. So, he writes this book on the black bourgeoisie, and the people that he's calling out for this very shallow existence of consumption, of denying where they came from, while they're also being rejected by people who are fully white, he's calling out this segment of people. And if we will be honest, we can see in our society right now, black people who don't want to identify with anything black. Some of them will even tell you that's too black, I can't be involved in it. While at the same time, they want to be above the Negro masses, but at the same time, they're also rejected from being fully received into white culture. Now, what we are seeing today, long after this was written about the black bourgeoisie, is that now, I feel like preaching. Now that our white sisters and brothers realize that they are at a population deficit, okay? And they realize that their numbers are at extinction level, because anytime a ethnicity or a ethnic group drops below what they call the rate to reproduce one's ethnicity, which is 2.0, in case you all never, we talked about this before, but the number, you know, having a husband, a wife, and 2.5 kids, that's supposed to be the rate at which an ethnic group reproduces itself and keeps its ethnicity going in the world. So if your ethnic group drops below 2.0, you're already at extinction level. This is what white Americans understand. So when they are talking, and when the white nationalists are talking about their purity and their ethno state that they want to get started, they're not speaking from a place that they don't know what they're talking about. They know what they're talking about. They know that their group of people is at extinction level, which is under 2.0. And I believe white America is at either 1.8 or 1.9. In other words, in order for your ethnicity to be able to keep going and to perpetuate generationally, the family units within your ethnicity should be having about 2.5 kids, or 2 kids and 1 in the belly. All right? And that's not happening with white America. So because that's not happening, all of a sudden, you are seeing white America begin to embrace more the black bourgeoisie, which of course, as we talked about, are the mixed blood aristocracy and people who were free before the Civil War. There's a certain type of black person they will embrace. All right. And why are they embracing them? They're embracing them because of population extinction. So if I want to keep my population going, I now have to be willing to open up to embrace certain people to mate with, so that I can keep my population going. I know y'all think everybody is getting together for love. I get it. But some people understand that this is survival of the fittest. I know. Now somebody would say, well, what's an example of that? What is a current example of that we could see today? I'll give you one. We just saw one. We just saw one where everybody was like, oh, this is so wonderful. What's her name? Somebody knows her name. Everybody calling her the Black Princess, right? We just saw it. Thank you, Lady Barbara. Thank you. Exactly. Hence all the miscegenation commercials. You are exactly correct. Because now we've got to reframe our acceptance of certain black people so that our group that's becoming extinct will begin to receive them. Because before they weren't receiving us. And I say us as in those that are referred to as the black bourgeoisie. All right. Historically, they were not being received by whites because they were of mixed blood aristocracy. All right. But now, because they are at extinction level, now they are encouraging the unions. All right. And if you know anything about, I did some research on Meghan Markle. She is actually what they would have called an octoroon in this day and in this particular time, meaning she is not quote unquote fully black. She's about 1/8 black. Okay. Her father's bloodline, her father's heritage actually connects to the royal heritage, in case you all didn't know. So I know people are saying it's a love match, but the reality is her and Prince Harry are actually distant cousins. They are 15 cousins removed through her father's bloodline. So they're kissing cousins. They're distant cousins. And we know that in England, right, they tend to marry someone who's of their bloodline, who's a cousin. So she may not be a royal, but because of her father's aristocratal lineage, she's related to them. She's related to Prince Harry. All right. So when people are asking the question, how did she get in? That's how she got in. She got in through her father's bloodline. Just like Princess Diana. Princess Diana was not a royal. She was a commoner, but she was still part of the bloodline. Same thing with Kate, who married Prince William. She's a commoner, but she's still a part of the bloodline. Hope I'm helping someone. All right. So the media portrayal is this is a love match. You know, she's going to be the first mixed. She will be the first mixed royal, the mixed royal, right? But the reality is there was a queen before her that was black. Her name was Charlotte. The queen herself has some mixed ancestry. And I think it just recently came out that Prince William, through his mother Diana, has West Indian ancestry. So she's not the first, people. I'm just saying, just do a little research. All right. But again, there's a reason why she was accepted into the bloodline, or into being received as being acceptable as a choice for Prince Harry. They are related. Understand, the royals don't do anything, and they don't allow you to do anything without vetting you. So she is related. All right. I promise you she is. If you haven't researched it yet, I did. Go and research. Type in are Meghan and Harry related, and it will pull it up, and it will show you the genealogical chart, and it will show you where the chart finally connects, and both of them are born. All right. So here's the beginning of his piece, and I'm not going to obviously get through it today. We'll come back to it next Tuesday, Lord willing. Behind the mask. Since the black bourgeoisie lived largely in a world of make-believe, the masks which they wear to play their sorry roles conceal the feelings of inferiority and of insecurity and the frustrations that haunt their inner lives. Despite their attempt to escape from real identification with the masses of Negroes, they cannot escape the mark of oppression any more than their less favored kinsmen. In attempting to escape identification with the black masses, they have developed a self-hatred that reveals itself in their deprecation of the physical and social characteristics of Negroes. Likewise, their feelings of inferiority and insecurity are revealed in their pathological struggle for status within the isolated Negro world and craving for recognition in the white world. Their escape into a world of make-believe with a sham society leaves them with a feeling of emptiness and futility, which causes them to constantly seek an escape in new delusions. So he comes right off the bat telling you how he feels about the black bourgeoisie. All right. He says, 1, he believed they lived in a world of make-believe. 2, he believed that they conceal their feelings of inferiority and insecurity. 3, he said they attempt to escape identification with the black masses. 4, he said they struggle for status within an isolated Negro world of just themselves, craving for recognition in the white world. And 5, he says their make-believe society leaves them with a feeling of emptiness and futility. All right. So we're going to jump back into this on next Tuesday, where he talks about the mark of oppression, and then he talks about insecurities and frustrations that the black bourgeoisie are experiencing because, again, they're rejecting their blackness, but at this point in time in history, they were not yet accepted into white society. They were a word that is now out now. They were living a gray existence, right? Because they were separated. They were closing themselves off from the Negro masses, but at the same time, they were not yet accepted into white society. And we know that some of them in the 50s, in the 60s, started passing for white so that they could enter into white society, which meant, as one of the royal experts said about Meghan Markle, he said, I don't know why everybody black is applauding this, because in order for her to assimilate into the royal family, she is going to have to leave her blackness and assimilate into whiteness. This is what one of their royal experts said. So that's it for today. I hope that you have gotten something out of what I shared with you today. I hope that you will go and research some of the things that we talked about today to start your journey of truth and discovery, right? Some of you have already started researching. I know that's why you're not commenting on my screen because you're already Googling while I'm talking, but that's good. I want you to fact check me, okay? This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. Tomorrow, we will be back in our book, The Sacred Search, and also Kingdom Marriage. We're going to be talking again about relationships. Those of you who are single and those of you who are engaged, we're going to be looking at The Sacred Search. And then those of you who are married, we're going to be covering some things out of the Kingdom Marriage book by Tony Evans. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out and be light today. Take care and God bless. Thank you again. Take care and God bless.